I can't share my screen. Is that a possibility to you change that, or? Let's see. So the host is Mary, right?
Crystal.
No, I will change it. I
Crystal.
did not know it was still disabled, so that's on me. Just give me 1 second. I apologize, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, that's not a problem. We're all still getting used to this.
The joys of technology.
Yeah. At least we do have it.
Part of getting used to it is I was having a really, really bad hair day, and so I wore my grandson's batting helmet. And then I was told at a subsequent meeting that they missed my batting helmet. So it could be worse. Could be worse.
It is fixed, doctor. Sorry about that. It is fixed.
And that was Marley in the
Okay.
batting helmet.
Thank you, Donna.
Got someone up front.
All right. So we are all on board. Looks like I can share the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and see here. Start this from our current slide. And so today I'm going to be discussing redistricting, or rather this, political battle over gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is essentially the process in which, politicians draw the district lines for political gain. And I know, it sounds to me like visiting you all about 10 minutes prior to this presentation, I might not be telling you anything new. But this is all worth a discussion, maybe a reminder of probably some things that are, say, required of redistricting, and reminder of, some past court cases. But there are, a few things that, let me just go ahead and move this over here. A few things that we, should generally go over. Fundamentally, this is a process. It's a governmental process, right?
So
and
about gerrymandering. If you're interested in
it's a governmental process to apportion the state's population for representation in the House, and also for state legislatures. But this is also a political process. And within this political process, its method, which should just be a fundamental governmental process, is utilized to gain political advantages. And they do that through, of course, gerrymandering, redrawing district lines so that it ensures that one political party has that electoral advantage over another. So politicians or commissions in our states, right? So it's all at the state level, draw those district lines for political gain, all right? In some ways, in which they do this is through partisan gerrymandering, which we're probably going to be talking a little bit more about today, and racial gerrymandering, but also bipartisan, or what's known as sweetheart gerrymandering. This is a nice little infographic that illustrates how this can be done through packing and cracking, right? So let's say we have an even number of individuals of both, say, the blue party and the red party, in which you could draw, right, an even distribution of lines to make those elections competitive. Perhaps we have some individuals in the blue party and the red party who aren't all that attached to their party, to their political party. It is quite possible that in these situations that a blue candidate or a red candidate can emerge victoriously out of the election. But that's not, this is all, to make these district lines evenly distributed would essentially be, perhaps a nonpartisan demographer's pipe dream to do. And essentially what we're in the state of Missouri is in a situation where we can have, that nonpartisan demographer create something like this. But that's not what happens, all right? Even with commissions that are supposed to be nonpartisan, we end up getting gerrymandered districts. And you can do it one way, by packing a bunch, right? If you want to ensure, say, one party wins at least one seat, or you want to dilute, right, the party's seats another party's seat, you can pack them into one particular district. Or if you want to dilute, right, another group, so you can crack it, right? Partisan gerrymandering is gerrymandering for partisan gain. We also have instances, of course, of racial gerrymandering, which is sometimes a little bit more difficult to difficult to unfurl from this notion of partisan gerrymandering, and that is because a lot of racial minorities associate themselves with Democrats, so it's a little bit more difficult. In the state of Missouri, from what I've noticed, we have a lot of bipartisan, or what's known as sweetheart gerrymandering, right? Since 2010, left the 2018 change with Amendment 1, bipartisan gerrymandering, in my view, has existed in the state of Missouri because both parties, through their nonpartisan commissions, tend to kind of keep their districts safe, right? They keep the Republican district safe at the state legislative level, and also the Democratic seats safe, okay? So that's what essentially we're recurring. Now, what we have, this is on this particular slide, of course, we have this iconic image of what some people say is the first gerrymander, which really actually isn't. This is, the gerrymander, how we get the name gerrymander, right? We all, most of us kind of know this, but for those of you that don't, this is the origin of the term gerrymander. This is where the Governor Elbridge of Massachusetts approved the map of the state Senate. And it looked like a salamander. And this was drawn to ensure the election of the Democratic Republicans, one of the first party systems or mass party systems that we had in the United States. And that's where essentially we get this term. But gerrymandering for partisan purposes has occurred long before even this 1810, after post-1810 census gerrymander. And we see that the earliest account actually was by Patrick Henry. Here we have James Madison running in Virginia against James Monroe. So the very first congressional race in 1789, we see Patrick Henry actually try to defeat James Madison's candidacy, which he didn't end up doing, by drawing lines to try to defeat James Madison. So this goes way back. This goes back to the very first, right, drawing of those congressional districts prior to the first census, or prior to actually the first count of what we're going to do. What's interesting is, okay, let's fast forward to 2019, all right? In 2019, we have a scenario in which partisan gerrymandering is challenged, right? And it's been challenged to the court systems for quite a while now. And this particular case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. This is an opinion of the Chief Justice John Roberts. And what's interesting, though, is, by the way, the League of Women Voters was part of this package of Rucho versus Common Cause, I believe in North Carolina. But what the court says, and this is a very closely divided decision, in the Rucho decision, Chief Justice Roberts actually utilized the gerrymandering tactics of Patrick Henry from 1789 as evidence that illustrates that it was a tolerated practice at the inception of the Republic. And that is the reasoning as to one of the reasons as to why the Supreme Court can continue, has allowed this continuance of partisan gerrymandering. So essentially, what they say through this logic is that partisan gerrymandering has occurred. It has occurred in the past since the inception of the Republic. And therefore, since it has been tolerated, it can continue to be tolerated. And in fact, this is a political question and beyond the purview of the federal court system. So partisan gerrymandering can continue, right? One, though, in my view, can make the argument that a lot of things were tolerated, right, over the past few centuries. And a lot of those things aren't tolerated now, okay? So we can make a counter argument to this. However, the Supreme Court in a very tightly divided court, a 5-4 decision, has stated that this can occur. So where do we go from there? Okay, where we go from there is, of course, to the state level, right? If the federal court system can't really do much, it's beyond the purview of the court for partisan gerrymandering. Some of the issues, which we'll talk about in a bit here, can be resolved at the state level. And where essentially, of course, is this process legally defined? So we have two spheres of power where the process lies. The very first, of course, the very basis of the redistricting process, it is legally defined in terms of how we count populations, or who counts populations, through Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. This is the basis of apportionment for House members, right? Where we find the parameters of what states can do and what states can't do when it comes to the redistricting process are through those court cases. And we'll go through a couple of court cases here in a moment to kind of define the parameters. But as of now, since the common cause decision, partisan gerrymandering can occur according to the Supreme Court, right? So states, this is one thing I think when I talk to students, I talk, of course, to a lot of students, is that they don't understand that there is a very, very distinct sphere of power between states and federal government when it comes to this particular process. States are the ones that determine how to apportion the population. While federal government counts the population, states are the ones that determine how they're going to redraw district lines. Okay, and of course this involves a variety of other things that could be on a totally separate topic, which includes, you know, having these populations counted, how are they counted, which we can talk about a little bit when we discuss Amendment 3, how they're counted, who gets counted, stuff like that. It's incredibly important when when you're thinking about the guidelines of federal funding, right? And of course, at the very basis, this also determines how many electoral college votes each state has. So there's a variety of things that are involved with this this particular issue area. All right. So today we're highly concerned about partisan gerrymandering. Problems that have existed prior to this were primarily focused on malapportionment, or this notion of having equal proportions of the population represented either at the state legislatures or in Congress. Right. In the 1960s, we had actually a pretty big problem. And this is a reminder for those of you who do know this court case of Baker versus Carr, or those of you who don't know this court case of Baker versus Carr, we had actually a pretty big problem. One example, and this is in the state of Tennessee, is that if some states weren't reapportioning, meaning some states weren't redrawing district lines after population growth had occurred. And we know that population growths occur, right, during, of course, the early 20th century, occurred rapidly in urban areas. So we had an urban-rural issue where urban populations weren't adequately represented because their populations grew and the number of representatives that those areas had stayed the same. So we had what's known as malapportionment, or poor apportionment, if you want to remember it that way. And Baker versus Carr challenged that. Out of Baker versus Carr, we get this notion that goes back to, okay, we have a standard of one person, one vote in this country. And that standard should apply also to legislative redistricting. In fact, this issue of malapportionment, or ensuring that each district has a similar number of individuals per representative, isn't a political question, but a legal one. And so the courts can take this on, and the courts can state that there should be equal numbers of, or approximately equal numbers of individuals in each district, so that populations' interests are not diluted, right? And that was for congressional seats or U.S. House elections, right? We also get another court case 2 years later, Right? We have to sometimes remember that even if something is federally ruled upon or ruled upon as it applies to, say, federal seats, it's still unanswered as to whether or not that applies to state legislative seats or for state legislatures. And Reynolds versus Sims, Reynolds versus Sims resolves that problem as well for state legislatures. And, you know, there's accounts of, in some states, for example, Connecticut, where one district had 191 individuals and another district had 81,000 individuals. Obviously, you know, this district with 81,000 individuals, votes were diluted substantially, while we have 191 individuals being represented by one person. Right. Another example is in New Hampshire's, you know, some estimates were that, you know, resident of one township's vote was over 1,000 times more powerful. Right. And in this Reynolds case, it was resolved that also states have to ensure that malapportionment does not occur for state legislative seats as well, or those state legislative districts. And it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because I kind of want people to think about representation as a whole, right? Chief Justice Warren stated in this particular opinion that legislators represent people, not trees or acres, right? Legislators are elected by voters, not farms or cities or economic interests. And this is one of the things that I think always kind of stops, you know, some political scientists when they start thinking about representation. What is the nature of representation? Is it a geographical area? Is it the whole of the people who reside in that geographical area? And with this particular ruling, you know, we kind of want to think when we start thinking about partisan gerrymandering, if there is partisan intent, then whose interests will be represented in those geographic areas, right? So that's one thing to think about is representation. What do you want out of a representative who just represents a district with multiple interests? And we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to Missouri's Amendment number 3, right? And as you can see, you know, here's approximately equally apportioned districts in the United States. And they take on many forms, right? Some states just have one, so it's just the state, one representative in the House. But we also have a number, you know, of districts that are interestingly apportioned, right? And if you notice that out of these districts, right, this is actually from 538. If you take a look at it, there are, you know, really kind of small, fairly small number of competitive districts that exist. With a 90% reelection rate for incumbents, we can make the argument that if these districts are gerrymandered, just so that one particular party can win the election, that we have an fairly uncompetitive system in the United States. Okay. So the recent era, since the 1960s, kind of resolved the issue over malapportionment. The recent era of districting actually focuses on how the lines are drawn. And there are a variety of different methods that can be utilized, right? And again, a reminder is that federal government is only charged with counting population, and the state governments are the ones that redraw this. Among the various systems that exist among the states, usually it is the party in power that has the authority to redraw district lines. Other states, some states utilize redistricting commissions that are nonpartisan. In the state of Missouri, after 2010, Missouri utilized, of course, the bipartisan redistricting method. And now, of course, after 2018, with Amendment 1, we are geared, that is, if Amendment 3 does not pass, we are geared towards having a very, very unique redistricting system through a nonpartisan demographer. But usually, right, even though you have nonpartisan redistricting commissions or even bipartisan redistricting commissions, there is still some gerrymandering that can be observed. right? We do find in the research that nonpartisan redistricting commissions do in fact create more competitive districts. But when it's the party in power, these districts are fairly insulated from outside forces outside of the political party, right? And so this method, right, especially since the 1990s, since GIS has been utilized to count populations and count vote margins, and of course, if your states register individuals from under a political party, you can utilize that to redraw district lines. This method itself is where the flashpoint exists when it becomes politicized, when a governmental process becomes politicized. And so I kind of want to look north at Iowa. If you notice, Iowa's congressional districts look fairly compact, which is one of the redistricting principles. Looks pretty compact. You notice these lines follow counties, right? And they do a pretty good job. You don't see any arms tangling out and around cities or major cities, or reaching out into rural areas. And this is because since the 1980s, Iowa has had actually a nonpartisan staff draw these maps. And they prohibit utilizing political data. And the political data that's sometimes utilized could be partisan affiliation, previous election results. And with partisan gerrymandering, knowing that stuff is very important because you either want to crack or pack a district, to dilute votes, or pack a district to create other districts, right, that are favorable for your political party. So Iowa does stand alone in how this actually handles redistricting responsibilities. You can look at the Iowa models of redistricting via the National Conference of State Legislatures. It's a very good resource to look at different types of methods that do exist in the states. That's very different from Texas. Okay, so if we look at it, or Texas, or even a lot of other places that utilize partisan gerrymandering. If you look at Texas, the city of Austin is very liberal. And this is a quote from Jason Fierman, who's the founder of the Redistrict Network. He says, if the state capital of Texas and its fourth largest city was all in one congressional district, it would certainly be a deep blue bastion, right? And you can see these lines being drawn just to kind of cut up, right, to crack the Austin area into a variety of Republican districts, and then, of course, one blue district, right? This is a prime example of a state that where the party in power in the state legislature has the ability to redraw district lines. You're going to, of course, see this, and it'll make sense because, you know, political parties, I mean, what do? Political parties are organizations that are, you know, their primary goal is to get their candidate elected into political office. And so this is part of the process of that goal. So it makes sense, of course, that parties will do this. And if you look at, and it's kind of interesting because there is a concern, it's not a secret, right? Partisan gerrymandering is not a secret. This is a screenshot of RedMap. RedMap is a redistricting, RedMap is an acronym for the Redistricting Majority Project. RedMap's program was launched in 2010, and this is a program created by what's known as the Republican Leadership Committee, or the State Leadership Committee, which was created in 2002. Now, the Republican State Leadership Committee is tasked with getting lower level seats, the Republican Leadership Committee is tasked with ensuring that individuals of the political party are elected into their state legislature. So their focuses are on those lower level seats. Right? The Republican Party actually has been very, very good at and well organized, really since the late 1990s and early 2000s, in organizing in the state level. And this is part of that program. The idea is to focus on selecting individuals into seats at those state legislative levels, because the end goal is to ensure that their party has control over the redistricting process so they can continue to create safe seats for the following elections, right? So that's the role. And you can see, you know, right, they'd state that they flipped at least 19 legislative bodies, right? And here's part of their summary report, how our strategy of targeting state legislative races in 2010 led to a Republican House majority in 2019. So it's not only just ensuring safe seats for the state legislature, but it's also because the state legislature, whatever party in power, you know, whatever party's in power, also helps to create those congressional district maps, right? And here we go, and this is actually from their website as well. They say the rationale was straightforward. Controlling the redistricting process in these states would have the greatest impact on determining how both state legislative and congressional district boundaries would be drawn. Right? Drawing new district lines in states with the most redistricting activity presented the opportunity to solidify conservative policymaking at the state level and maintain a Republican stronghold for the next decade. Right? Now, I do have a caveat here. Just because you know, RedMap exists and it is a Republican organization or Republican policy and organizations that are pretty straightforward about what they're doing, Democrats do it as well, right? And so we see there is a lot of news, of course, on gerrymandering. Here's one from a local NPR affiliate. Right, or gerrymandering on steroids, how Republicans stack the nation's state houses, right? It makes not interesting news, of course. But I want everyone to keep in mind that Democrats do it too. Again, political parties exist with one end goal, and that is to get their candidate elected under their party name, right? And the process continues thereafter, is to keep that elected candidate under their party name in office. And in order to do so, you need to ensure that those seats are safe. And how do you do that? Well, there's a variety of different things that one can do, right? Or parties can do. Pour money into an election, right? Put efforts into, you know, efforts into mobilization of voters, but also be a part of the process in which ensures or can ensure that a race is not going to be closed for a candidate that's running for re-election under your party name. So I want to keep that, everyone keep that in mind. Both Republicans and Democrats do it because their end goals are the same, right? And here we have, and it's kind of interesting because the Republicans were actually pretty successful in 2008. These are the state legislatures, whether or not they're Democrat, split, or totally Republican. Don't mind these lower southern states. They're still, at this point in time, some of them are still identifying as Dixiecrats, not necessarily Democrats. That changes after 2012. 2010, not much changes. After that, here we see the fruits of labor, along with some other political movements that occurred in these southern states and some of the Midwest states, and along the Rust Belt, where we see now, right, a pretty strong Republican stronghold. Right, these tactics do work. Just some political parties are better at doing some things than others because of the tactics that they utilized. Right. I do want to kind of move back a little bit too about what you can and cannot do. We're talking a lot about partisan gerrymandering. There were efforts in the 1990s, by the way, and we talk about race, efforts in the 1990s to try to create, you know, so again, we're thinking about representation. Who do you want to represent particular areas? In the 1990s, Democrats made concerted efforts to create what's known as minority majority districts. That would mean that at least there would be some opportunity if you pack districts with racial minorities, in particular African Americans or Latinos, that you would actually get a representative, right, out of that. And they were successful, and they did this too through gerrymandering, right? You can see this is a district in North Carolina. This particular district was challenged in court though, okay? So, you know, the efforts to ensure representation for one particular group over another occurs as well, right? However, this was challenged in court with the court case of 1993. That was ruled upon in 1993. And we see Justice O'Connor kind of talk a little bit about this notion of representation as well, right? They had to redraw those lines, by the way. Those lines had to be redrawn because at this point it was clear that you cannot redistrict based on race, right? It was under the standard of strict scrutiny, where you cannot, of course, make race a consideration while conducting this political process. So Justice O'Connor kind of states, right, this interesting, this is her opinion. She says, a reapportionment plan that includes in one district individuals who belong to the same race, but who are otherwise widely separated by geographical and political boundaries, and who may have little in common with one another, but the color of their skin bears an uncomfortable resemblance of a political apartheid. It reinforces the perception that members of the same racial group, regardless of their age, education, economic status, or the community in which they live, think alike, share the same political interests, and will prefer the same candidates at the polls. Right? So it's something to think about, right? Again, with this notion of representation. We don't have a system in the United States that has proportional representation. We don't have a system in the United States that includes a variety of different political parties. It's pretty much a blunt tool, right? Creating these geographic or arbitrary lines really around these geographic constituencies and saying, yes, they probably have the same interests. And that of course applies, you know, in Justice O'Connor's mind, applies beyond, that goes beyond race, right? So it's something to think about because we have political interests, similar interests that exist across states, between districts. But then again, those similar interests, even though they may exist across the state or between districts, those similar interests may still not be represented in government because of partisan gerrymandering. So it's a very complex, I guess when we get down to it, the notion of representation in our particular system is can be very complex and has a lot of layers to it, right? So there are, throughout history, throughout time, that through these court rulings that have created principles of redistricting. And these are adopted by states. And states vary in their adoption into the rules in which they're going to redraw district lines. And the very first one is compactness, right? Out of the Shaw ruling also came this notion of, okay, districts should be compact or relatively compact. And these are just, you know, shoulds, right? Districts should also be contiguous with other districts, not trailing off in a line and creating another, you know, blob in another area while it cuts through some other districts. Also, it should preserve existing political communities. And these political communities include things like counties, right? You draw along county lines, right? Preserving the existing community there, or even cities and townships, or communities of interest, which could be a city. And you saw with the Iowa maps that Iowa did abide by that, and they do abide by that through their redistricting commission. Another one is, a preservation of the core of prior districts. Now that's very difficult to do if you lose a district in the House, but you should preserve what had existed prior to that. And of course, avoiding pairing incumbents within one district, right? You don't necessarily want to do that. But what we do know is that through court cases, we might have these principles. And, you know, the state of Missouri, under the bipartisan plan, had some of these principles, such as compactness, contiguity, preserving state county lines. Those are part of the criterion that existed. But we still have things that that states can't do, and they can't be malapportioned. You can't use race as a criteria. Now let's take a look at Missouri. Right here is the congressional map, the House map of the state of Missouri. Right, it looks pretty good, except for some areas don't look very compact. I think, you know, in my view, they're pretty compact. We don't see anything crazy like you saw, you know, in Austin. That maybe we do because of low population in the state. We don't have as many representatives, but also because there might be a little bit of sweetheart gerrymandering going on. The state Senate is very similar. You can see it runs along county lines, right? Everything's fairly compact, but you still see, you know, districts moving into one another. All right. Now, reviewing reviewing this map, and I know I'm running low on time here. Reviewing this map, we have to keep in mind that, you know, the state of Missouri isn't heavily gerrymandered. However, some of the issues are more or less with how safe these seats are for these individuals, because they're not competitive. So you may not see anything like North Carolina in 1991, or like Austin, or like what happened in West Virginia and Maryland or Wisconsin. You still, though, have a situation where we have some issues, okay? So some of the issues, the most obvious, of course, is partisan advantage. Another major issue conceptually to this notion of what it means to be a democracy is that politicians are choosing voters. And I love the description that the League of Women Voters gave for this talk, right? Because this is a major issue if we're thinking about democratic theory and how democracies are supposed to work. This is antithetical, right? Politicians choosing voters are antithetical to this idea that the power resides in citizens to select representatives, okay? So that's a larger issue. Another issue, though, is that it reduces political competition, and we're going to take a look at Missouri. Political competition, why is it important? Well, competition makes, research-wise, actually, we find this in research, political competition, right? If there's a competitive election and a representative knows that their following election in 2 years is going to be competitive, they're more responsive to voters. So we have responsive government at that point, right? And that is primarily because of fear of reprisal or accountability at the polls when elections reoccur. If they're safe, they don't have that pull of accountability, right? Another thing is that voters are going to have clear choices with more competitors, very clear choices and differentiation between their candidates, and you have political choice as well. Also with competitive elections are considered to be good because of the mobilization process that exists. Mobilization processes such as political campaigns, informing citizens about the election, or even organizations such as yours going out and informing the public about elections, helps to keep accountability in governance, because citizens then become a lot more political knowledgeable about what's going on, right? And we have a situation where it reduces political competition and creates incumbency advantage, where incumbents, people who already have a seat in government, are reelected over and over and over again. About 90% of members of the House, the U.S. House of Representatives, are reelected. In Missouri, where the U.S. House seats, we only have one seat, which is actually fairly new. The last election, this is for District 2 with Ann Wagner. Only one seat, 1 out of 8 seats are actually competitive. But if we look at the General Assembly, so this is lower house, look at this, okay? I came up with these estimates. I was working on this before, but the percentage of uncompetitive seats for the past elections and this election is 97%, in the 90s, right? So 97% of the seats up for grabs in 2020 for the Missouri General Assembly, the lower house, is 97%. Only 3% of the seats are actually competitive, from my estimates. And what's interesting too, and 2018 was an anomaly because we actually saw a lot more people stepping into looking at political office. Half of these seats are uncontested, so there's nobody, nearly half, right? Nobody running against it, right? And so that takes away from this notion that elections are inform citizens, get them involved, but also takes away from this notion that they're accountable, that they can be accountable to or have retribution at the polls. And half of the seats up for election in the lower house of Missouri, the General Assembly, are uncontested. Meanwhile, 97% are actually uncompetitive, even if they are contested. And if you look at the results, a lot of these results, sometimes you'll see that candidates win by over 60% vote margin, right? Some other issues, right? Another issue is ideological consistency through representation. Under conditions such as non-competitive elections, it can allow representatives to do what they want, essentially, right? Now, I know a lot of representatives who are highly concerned about their district, very embedded in their district, but there isn't any sort of modifying force of will that is palatable for individuals, or many individuals, if their state is not competitive, right? Representatives do not have modifying forces to tame legislation that may be deemed too far right or even too far left. And you can see that here's Missouri, and these are ideology scores. Missouri ideology of the state house, right, is much more far right than say where Missourians are supposed to be. Here would be perfect, near perfect representation. You see that the case for states like California, Florida, even a bit for Colorado as well, right? Another thing to consider: do we have trustees as representatives who constituents entrust or to make good policy decisions on their behalf? And if you don't have a trustee, and you want a delegate, that's representatives who are vessels of opinions of their constituents. Most people want those these days. Do we even have that if these elections are uncompetitive due to the creation of safe seats through gerrymandering, right? Or do we have neither? What do we have is the next question when we have situations like this, right? And so we know, and I'm gonna kind of try to wrap it up here. I know we've started late. But a real reminder of what we had was prior to 2018, Missouri had that bipartisan redistricting commission. While there's no real clear visual of partisan gerrymandering, because essentially we have some, just a creation, the maintenance of safe seats, I'd have to say. There is still there's uncompetitiveness that exists. So while we may not look like Texas, while we may not look like other states, such as Wisconsin or Maryland, we still have a lot of uncompetitive seats. So in 2018, and I thought this was very interesting when I saw this, Missouri passed, right, this new way to redistrict. This is going to circumvent the ability for politicians or party activists, by the way. These bipartisan commissions are selected, and many of these individuals who work on these commissions are considered to be ordinary citizens, but also have been heavily involved with their political parties. Okay, so it's going to circumvent, right, the ability to gerrymander. So a nonpartisan demographer is hired by the state auditors. Kind of interesting. The demographer reduces what's known as the efficiency gap, and there's a mathematical method to determine what that gap is. That is a gap of wasted votes, right? To try to create competitive districts, right? And then Brennan Center, and this is very unique, okay? It says the first in the nation to require a statistical test to measure partisan fairness. And so what you're gonna have essentially are or try to achieve in order to see if that's how this works out, if Amendment 3 does not pass, is a lot of competitive seats, right? So Clean Missouri was a very big effort that included other things that we know, to clean up politics in Missouri through a variety of other ethics issues, such as how much lobbyists can give to representatives, right? And it passed quite a bit, quite well, with over 60% of the vote. I'm sorry, I have that this here, right? So you know the results, or many of you know these results. A clear majority, right? Uh-oh. Okay, and of course, quite a bit of opposition. And a lot of opposition, of course, was from members in the state legislature, right? If these elections become competitive, you might not see many of those legislators back, right? And of course, that is a threat to, can be a threat to both parties depending on where you are geographically, right? Other aspects, again, reduce lobbying gifting by capping it at $5. We know Jefferson City, or actually, the state of Missouri was very well known for very lax ethics laws at the state legislature, right? And of course, a reduce of fairly minimally direct campaign contributions. Now, moving forward to the ballot initiative Amendment 3, it was kind of interesting to watch because this initial ballot initiative, which was meant to essentially erase, right, the 2018 initiative, Amendment 1, to go back to the bipartisan system, was quite misleading to a lot of citizens, right? So here's the question, here's the initial question for Amendment 3. And, ethically, this ballot initiative has been on the Secretary of State's website for a long time, and it's been deemed, by the, as you all know, as being highly misleading. And unfortunately, so if citizens aren't paying attention, and this is what they initially saw, and aren't thinking too much about the election or the ballot initiatives at least, they might not know that this would essentially overturn the 2018 Amendment 1, right? So this was quite misleading to create a citizen-led independent bipartisan commission, right? It says nothing about essentially axing Amendment 1 from 2018, right? All right, and here's the official ballot title now. They just changed this, as many of you are probably all aware. So now it says it's going to change the redistricting process voters approved in 2018, right? By transferring responsibility for drawing state legislative districts from nonpartisan state demographer to governor-appointed bipartisan commissions. Finally, we get really, I would have to say, fair ballot language, while the ballot language was quite misleading before. So of course, what do they want to, why would there be a concerted effort to overturn this? So some of the things that, we have to consider is, of course, representatives are in fear of losing their seats. That's, that I think is the primary concern. Now, granted, they're afraid to lose their seats. And granted, a lot of representatives, of course, think that they're serving their communities very well. But it is a threat to their current position. Some of my final thoughts are is that when we consider changes to redistricting plans, I think that we should include expectations about representation. What do we expect out of representation? What is representation really supposed to look like? Who do you want representing all of us in one community? Or are you expecting just a representative to represent your interests and your interests only? If so, you might want a completely different system like proportional representation, or like, or like some other models that we have, right? And then, of course, Amendment 1 in 2018, if it stands, and I haven't seen any polls on this. Now that the ballot language has changed, perhaps Amendment 3 will not pass in 2020. if Amendment 1 continues, we should see increased electoral competition, which is a good thing for democracy and a good thing for citizens in Missouri. Electoral competition we've gone over. It should. It may also modify the conservativeness of the state legislature, but also liberalness of representatives that emerge out of districts that include regions that are associated with traditionally liberal districts, right? And of course, we can expect the loss of sitting representatives, which, you know, many citizens don't know who their representatives are, you know, if that matters in the grand scheme of things. That's something to consider. But we can probably expect, and I'm just trying to predict here, the loss of a lot of sitting representatives, but also perhaps the entry of a lot of really good quality candidates because competition has increased. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end it there. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I'd like to open it up to, I guess, any questions. I don't know if you guys have time.
We're going to make time.
Okay.
But we want to take advantage of your good presence. Dr. Kuhlmann, thank you very much. For me, it's a topic I can understand at a high level, but in the real deep parts of the weeds, sometimes I think I need more information. So maybe questions here will help bring some of that out. I'd ask all of you to, if you click on participants and you see that list over there on the right-hand side, you'll see at the very bottom it says raise hand. Now you can do that, or you can actually raise your physical hand. And so I'm going to let Crystal recognize each of you as she sees and get your questions out. For example, I saw Becky's hand go up. So we need Becky unmuted, Crystal. She's not yet.
She should be able to unmute herself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Becky might be frozen.
No, she's not at all, but she needs to unmute herself.
Yeah, I asked her to unmute herself, but I
think I might be able to unmute her. Let me see if I can do that. Does that work? No.
We can unmute ourselves. I just did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself,
Okay.
Becky.
Well, in the meantime, Laura has a question, it looks like.
Well, and Evelyn and Judy Ansel and Donna Hoke have all raised their hand.
I was at the end of them. Well, Donna will jump in. She's not bashful. Some of the things that you haven't talked about on this Amendment 3 is some of the terrible things they do about limiting your right to challenge the redistricting, what the court can do. Also only wanting to count registered voters and not everyone in the district.
Yeah.
Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not. No, you're not. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, but I can speak to some of those issues, especially counting populations. You know, there was a court case in 2006. It's called Evanwell versus Abbott, and that was in Texas. The Evanwell actually was upset because they thought that their districts was diluted, their voices were diluted because Texas had counted immigrant populations within the area. And the court essentially stated, yeah, no, Texas can count those populations, but essentially they left that up in the air as to, they said they may count those populations. So they left it up in the air as to who could be counted in states, the 2 states. So that would have to be challenged. So there isn't any hard and fast rule that, you know, when you count populations, it's only going to be registered voters, or children are going to be left out, or immigrant populations are going to be left out. You know, there is an argument that of this whole notion that if in fact individuals are representing geographic districts with people in them, all people should be counted, right? That's one notion. But there's also this interesting, well, fairly blunt argument saying, no, if they're not part of, you know, the political process, then they shouldn't be counted. But with Evanwell, that later, or this 2016 case, the Supreme Court pretty much left it open. So yeah, that is a concern. I mean, I would be concerned about that. Because then we have to think about who we're talking about in this larger and broader picture of representation, right? Who are we talking about? Not just, is it just voters? Is it also all the other populations that are you know, that are part of this process and our concerns and our interests?
Dr. Kuhlmann, my question was along that line too, because when you told us about the Chief Justice Warren's opinion, and I don't know if his opinion was related to the 1964 Reynolds versus Sims or what it was related to.
Yeah, it was.
You said something along the line that legislators are elected by voters. And I thought, you know, that might be the basis for upholding this awful, you know, proposal in Amendment 3 about counting only voters. What do you have to say about that opinion and Amendment 3?
Well, again, since the Supreme Court in 2016 left that open, you know, yeah, Amendment 3, if and I'm not a legal scholar. I focus a lot on elections, right? And also some concepts of representation, but yeah, it's unclear as to what states can do. Okay, and when things are unclear like that, states can do what they want until it's challenged, right? Just because a law, you know, or this concept like the Equal Protection Clause, this concept exists, doesn't mean that states can't do what they want until it's challenged, and years later, right? Years later, it's ruled upon.
Thank you.
I do have a question. Does anyone here know why in Missouri we keep passing these amendments by majority vote and then the legislature keeps trying to reverse them? You know, what is the power of the legislature to basically overrule the will of the people as expressed in a ballot? This has happened on concealed carry, and now it's trying to happen with Clean Missouri. So I just wondered what people knew about that.
Well, we know it's happened on the puppy mills. It happened on contributions. So it is because it doesn't meet the feelings of the legislature, they try to change it.
Okay.
And hopefully they won't do that to Medicaid expansion because they've been opposed. Now it's passed. I don't know whether they'll come back or not.
What I heard was that Parsons, if he is reelected, he will work really hard to make sure that the Medicaid expansion does not happen. Right now, he's supposed to have, they're supposed to have a plan by March, and it's supposed to be implemented in July of 2021, but that he will work really hard, just like his, you know, he and the legislature have against Clean Missouri. They will work very hard to not go forward with Medicaid expansion. It's one of the reasons that Nicole Galloway needs to be elected, because that's part of her platform now, is that she will make sure Amendment 2 gets implemented.
I have a question. I actually have two questions. First, coming off of a previous question, I'm wondering if Amendment 1 fails, Is it still possible for the legislature to decide that reapportionment would only count count voters? Is that within their power, or was that defined in 2018? That's my first question. My second question, I've always heard that one of the reasons why the state legislature is so unrepresentative of the will of the people is because there's a tremendous bias toward rural areas. And I wonder, can you comment on that in terms of districting?
Sure. For your first question, I think I'd have to look, but I believe it is entirely within the parameters of the ability for the state legislature to just count, right, voter eligible populations, or even just voter age populations, but more likely voter eligible or voter age populations for counting, right, until it's challenged. So they can utilize that method. I'd have to look a little bit more into it, but I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to. As for the rural question, yeah, you know, rural populations are quite large in the state of Missouri. You know, even on the, you know, in the exurbs or parts of the suburbs, we have individuals who represent the Republican Party, who create coalitions with, you know, within state legislatures or within the General Assembly with individuals in rural areas. Given that, you know, we have, I think, approximately 39% liberal, 43% conservative, and then a lot of moderates in the state of Missouri. Given those ideological factors that exist, I would have to say that, yeah, you know, what the policy making that occurs in the state of Missouri is like, you know, some analysis shows, is much more conservative than how the rest of Missouri is. And in fact, does represent those rural interests quite well. Right.
I have a question. If Amendment 3 doesn't pass and Nicole Galloway is elected, she is or was the state auditor and selects the demographer. So what happens then?
Well, I believe the new state auditor, whoever that's going to be, would select the demographer. If not, it's Nicole Galloway, I think. If she.
May I comment now, or is there somebody ahead of me, Sandy?
Go ahead.
Okay, because when Becky asked why does this keep happening in Missouri, that the legislature goes against the will of the people, Dr. Kuhlmann, that seems to be an example of what you described as ideological consistency, where elected representatives go against the will of the majority. Is that an example of ideological consistency that you described?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. Because competitives are, because these elections are not competitive, there isn't any way to pull these individuals back from doing what they want. You know, there's no accountability. So essentially, if they are highly partisan, they can follow the party, right? And continue doing what the outer ranks or the more extreme or far right or far left, depending on the state, parts of the party want to do. And so, yeah, there's no, and I think that's a great point. When I was thinking about that question is, why does this keep happening? Well, because it can. And because there's no punishment. There's no punishment, or they're still going to hold their seats.
And so therefore is ending, and I apologize for being partisan before. I was going on the fact that the league's position is no on Amendment 3. And what I had read about who was saying that I had read who would and who would not honor Clean Missouri. But so then is our only recourse, I guess, in getting the legislature to honor what the voters are voting for? Is that a change in party in our governorship? I mean, how do we change this?
Or the courts?
So I'm sorry, I was distracted a little bit. I see that I have a question from Facebook Live. Can you re-ask it a little bit? I'm sorry.
That's what I was saying is, first of all, I apologized if I was being partisan before.
Yeah.
I was going from the standpoint of the league's position is no on Amendment 3 because Clean Missouri was passed by the majority of voters. So if indeed we would like Clean Missouri to be honored, if indeed we vote no on Amendment, there's a majority vote on Amendment 3, is the only
Or
the voters get their will to be the product of gerrymandering already, and that's why our legislature is the way it is?
Oh man, you broke up. I'm so sorry. If I think I'm hearing you correctly, my understanding is you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really get the question because you broke up.
Oh, sorry about
and I don't
that.
know if it's because of me.
Downstairs, and he said I froze for a bunch of that. So yeah. I'm just, how do we change things? Is it by only changing the party of our governor? How do things change?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're thinking about policy, really policy comes out of the state legislature. And so what the state legislature, what you need to do is you either need, if the state legislature is not doing what you want to do, you got to change what's going on in the state legislature. And it seems to me that if it is the case that you feel, citizens are feeling as if representatives are a little bit too cushy in their positions and there isn't any form of accountability, especially since the elections are not competitive, lest a scandal, they're not going to lead. And therefore, if that's how citizens feel and also are they observing, then it's well within their right to change the system of how they select their representatives and how their elections are, whether or not their elections are going to be competitive. And Amendment 1, right, in 2018 may very well do just that, have a form of accountability through elections that citizens may want in the state of Missouri, which clearly they did with that vote margin of approval. Yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be through a governor, because if you think about it this way too, let's say Governor Parson wins, and let's say the 2020 census is over and Amendment 3 does not pass, Amendment 1 stands. You now have a legislature that probably won't be veto proof anymore if you have another governor, but also a legislature that is a little bit more of a modifying force, all right, in terms of the types of policies that come out of it. Because you can't change, while you can do a lot with executive orders with the executive branch, state legislatures like the Missouri General Assembly is where all the action occurs. And they will be forced, right, to listen to their constituents, right, lest they be reselected or lest they have a more competitive election because they're not doing what their constituents want, right? So those are my thoughts on that.
This is a little bit chicken and egg, but if we don't have the effects of redistricting and therefore more competitive races, more representatives.
Yeah.
Everybody's freezing.
Froze.
Well,
Yeah, other option.
Sandy, you froze. Can you start from the beginning, please?
Sure. Well, aside from the fact that if districts aren't redrawn, we don't re-elect representatives that are more representative. Are the courts the only recourse we have to enforce Amendment 1 should 3 fail?
Well, I guess you could make the argument that for that, well, I guess if the ballot language deadline has yet to pass, right? Is that the case? I'm trying to think about a case in which you could, where you could make the case that you can go to the courts. One would be misinforming voters, that this would be the language on the ballot prior to the election. And I mean, you can say that you can make the argument that it, essentially tainted the understanding of what that particular ballot meant. I mean, you could take it to the courts that way. But again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that a reasonable human being would say that, well, wait, hold on, the language was this the whole time. You promoted it like this and advertised like that, even though we have freedom of speech, that still could have an effect on what potential voters think they're voting on in a November election.
Well, no, that's not my question, but let me back up.
Oh, okay.
Get to that. Let me get to that. When you showed the original ballot language, and then you show what is now the ballot language. So my first question is that settled? Because I know it's being challenged again. When the judge in Cole County said, no, that's misleading, and here's how it should read, did that rewording stick? And will that appear on the ballot in November? That's the first question. The second question is, let's say Amendment 3 does not pass, and Amendment 1.
Darn, freezing.
While Sandy is frozen, I'll say that Sean told me just during the past 5 days, there will be no challenge, no court challenge to the new language. So if Sean was correct, and if nothing else surfaces, what Dr. Kuhlmann showed us will be on the ballot.
Yeah, what I did show you was a screenshot of the language from 2 days ago. And my understanding is that the Cole County judge, that was in reaction to what the court had said that they needed to do.
Okay.
Dr. Kuhlmann, I'm sorry. Dr. Kuhlmann, we do have Donna who had waited, and we did have one question for Facebook. I had sent you in the chat from Karen.
Yeah.
And then we also had Carol and Judy as well. So Donna, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, you're up.
Well, just very brief, because the Cole County judge did one thing, but the Western District, the 3 judges, they reworded it to what I think you're seeing now, because the Cole County judge had put the gerrymandering thing at the top, and it still looks like it's in number 3 slot of that question now. So that's just a statement. You can go on, whoever's next.
Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. We, as an organization, what can we do to defeat 3 other than phone banks?
I think signage. I mean, that definitely, because a lot of people, I mean, if you think about who's going to be participating in this election, we have a lot of individuals who aren't all that interested in politics, right? Or they don't, because it is a presidential election, you're not going to have a lot of people who are going to be paying attention to things. I hate to say it, but of course, for putting money into signage that articulates a slogan, a short slogan where they can wonder, and you can frame it for them, of course, wonder why no on 3 is the best choice.
Are there pamphlets we can hand out? Take door to door?
Yeah.
Becky's holding up something. How do we get our hands on them?
May I break in to tell you that as of yesterday, when the State League had Sean Nicholson on the phone, it was agreed that the league can buy these yard signs for $5 each.
Oh.
And we are asking if we can use the state grant funds to purchase these signs and give to the local leagues. So the State League will be working with Sandy to get you signs, and we'll get absolutely as many as we can for each local league. And that means even signs that will go in a non-league member's yard. So we're working on that. We also talked with them yesterday about the brochures and handouts, and the campaign to defeat the No on 3 campaign is going to give us free handouts. Sandy, how about that? They'll be free to the local leagues, so you won't even have to pay for the printing.
It's worth it.
That is in the works, folks, from the State League. Yes, Becky. Okay. So it's a matter of time.
And
another thing you can probably, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I did send you that question from Karen, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, okay, so Karen had asked, has the more even redistricting in Iowa changed the look of their legislative process? Unfortunately, I do not know that. What I do know is that if you have political, and this is generalizable to state legislatures, if you have political competition, legislators tend to work more so on legislation, and therefore they are much more responsive to their districts. So I'm not clear, because Iowa was in 1980. That's when they started institutionalizing their approach to redistricting. But what I can do is generalize overall, based on the research, is that, you know, there are more competitive elections through those nonpartisan redistricting commissions, and competitive elections lead to more responsive politicians.
Okay, gotta go.
Did Reva Capillari, did you have a question?
Well, it's kind of just a comment back to Becky's comment about they keep taking these, keep undoing what the voters want. And I think the other part of that for me is that this is taxpayer money that's being spent on these court cases, right? Am I correct about that? Sure. I mean, we're paying for the legislature to go back and undo laws that we've already passed. So I feel like we're paying for this twice, that, you know, they lose and then they go back and appeal, and we have to fight them again. So every time we do that, that money, I'm assuming, is coming out of, you know, the state money, which means taxpayer money. And so that's another issue maybe we should continue to bring in front of people. Well, you're not going to get your Medicaid because we're having to have, with the money's being spent on these court cases. I think most people, you know, would think, I don't want my money spent on that. If we passed it, why are they trying to undo it?
Very good point.
Yeah.
Stacey Webb, I think we're raising your hand.
No, I was clapping.
Oh, okay. That kind of hand. All right. Any other questions? Well, Dr. Kuhlmann, thank you very much for the timely and deep information. One thing I would say, messaging on this, how it works, how a state demographer does what they do, in simplest terms, would be, to me, a very important thing to come up with. We all know the principle that we want to hit at the end, which is better representation, but a little bit about how the demographer would actually do their work, so that the compactness, the contiguity, the representation on an equal racial basis, how that would work, boiled down on something half a page long, would certainly be useful if that could be achieved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that,
yeah, certainly
again, thank you very much for coming to us, and we're all hoping.
That Sandy won't freeze up again.
Yeah.
We got two Zoom
is our
calls in our house going at once, not to the same place, unfortunately. Can you hear me now? Nope.
Yes, yes.
You can. Well, it just said my internet connection was unstable, so much for that. Could we, let's move to announcements here, if we could.
Well, I want to thank you guys. I thank you everyone for having me. A great group for a deliberation, which is important for our system of governance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to get into announcements here, and because
thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is from Rita on the nominating committee. The nominating committee will be starting its work within the next few weeks. If there is anyone who would like to nominate either themselves or someone else after they've checked with that person, please let the committee chair, Rita Golden, know. Thanks to the members of her committee, who are Margie Ridgecreek, Dolores Blazer, Jean Ann Coons, Sue Moon, and Reba Capillari. So again, give your attention to that. We're needing to develop a slate of people for the board and some officers. The next item up, Becky, would you like to talk about voter services?
Yes, please. I have posted a lot of volunteer opportunities on the website, and because we have so many people that are interested in registering voters, I have to use the website and I have to coordinate that way. I can't reach out personally to everybody, and I cannot call everybody to remind them of what's going on. The one thing I do want to emphasize is I love all my volunteers, but I do need you to use the website and volunteer yourself so that you can, so that I can make plans. Right now, Thursday night, I had 6 people show up at Concord Career Center, and I think I had only created 2 or 3 slots because it's usually not a big event for us. And I love having volunteers, and I want you to all feel free to come and help out. But for instance, I don't have anybody for the Red Bridge or the Linwood Wise, and which are Monday afternoon. And so I would like you to consider going to other events, and please sign up for them on the website so I know people are going, so I know I can take supplies and everything will be copacetic, and we'll have the kind of event that we and the hosting institution feel will be beneficial to the public. So that is my big plea. And also please check the website volunteer opportunities frequently. We're adding more all the time. And Calvert and I are working on this, and we get more requests almost every day for volunteers to do this or that and the other thing. We just don't feel good about posting them until we have time, date, and exact place. Just showing up at a college is not good enough. I want to know what building you need to be at, you know. So please help me help you and volunteer on the website. And thank you to everybody who's done the registrar training. You don't have to be a registrar to help us register voters. It's been a very exciting couple of months, and we're marching forward going to October. And then I think we'll just be redirecting our energies more to getting out the vote. And we're still handing out the absentee mail-in ballot information as well. So thanks to everybody, and please use the website.
Thanks,
Done.
Becky. And I know you're providing a lot of other information to people who may be registered while they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mostly Like, because of the league's position, I have this, no on 3 flyer that I have been flashing. And I did put some comments in the chat. If you want no on 3, you can probably copy or download it yourself and make flyers, wait for Evelyn, the state's flyers, and distribute those. And then I've also got information on absentee and mail-in ballots. We will have a little something that we can hand out about the notary requirement. And then we're always promoting Vote 411 because it's just a really great kind of one-stop shop for voting. So it's more than just filling out voter registrations, it's voter education as well as registering.
Thanks, Becky. Pat Goodwin, can you speak about poll workers? I know Pat's joining by phone. Pat? Crystal, is she unmuted?
No, she's muted, but I'm unmuted.
There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that I just wanted to give a thank you to Becky because she's doing so much with voter services. I'm so glad she's doing that, and I know Simi is a big part of that effort too. So, but poll workers, first of all, I just wanted to let everybody know that 13 members have volunteered to work on November 3rd. We do qualify for the Adopt a Poll program. They require a minimum of 10 volunteers. We have 13. Each volunteer will make between $275 and $300 that day. So it's going to be a big fundraiser for the league. Also, in the past, members have supported the poll workers by adopting a poll worker. So keep your ears open and your eyes open for information on how you can support the 13 people who are spending the day at the polls by adopting them for an hour or a day or making a flat donation. Vote 411 will go active. The online voter guide will be active on October 5th. We're moving it up a couple weeks because we would like people to be able to vote early and be informed when they do that. We are printing voter guides and they will be delivered between October 12th and October 14th, again, a little bit early. And in the next week or so, you'll probably be hearing from us. A lot in the past, members have wanted voter guides to distribute in their neighborhoods or in communities around the city. So you'll be hearing from us about how you can request voter guides to distribute on your own. We're taking care of libraries and community centers, and we're doing some food banks through Link. But if the small businesses in your neighborhood, you'd like to make sure they have voter guides, then we'll let you know how you can request them.
Thank you, Pat. Cheryl, you want to talk a little bit about some radio exposure here?
Can I just add the poll monitoring at the same time of poll workers?
Yes, Donna, jump in.
And this poll monitoring is for the Voter Protection Coalition Advancement Project, and you have a little more flexibility. You can do a whole day or you can only do 4 hours. You let me know and I'll help you get the online training and send you information. So I put my information in the chat or send me a notice.
Also, a big thank you to Pat for moving that up, because that was a Herculean task to move that up. Just 2 weeks, but it's still a big improvement for this particular election and a lot of extra work.
You're here. Excuse me, Cheryl.
Our friends at KKFI have invited us to speak on Joseph Jackson's show called Cowtown Conversations. KKFI is 90.1. And we'll be on, Sandy will be on for sure on September 24th at 9 o'clock. And he'll be talking about the elections and early voting and getting your ballot in and early voting in person. Joseph Jackson is very involved in the political process, and he probably can do the show by himself, but we're much more entertaining to help him out. So we will be there on the 24th. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Well, is that AM or PM?
Oh, I'm sorry, AM.
Right.
Thank you.
I believe Anitra had to leave, and so I'm going to talk about her forum process. There are 4 Missouri House of Representative candidate Zoom forums on the following dates: the 28th of September, which is a Monday, for districts 13 and 15; Wednesday, the 30th of September for districts 20 and 31; Monday, October 5th for districts 30 and 35; and Tuesday, October 6th for district 37. To date, not enough candidates have been responding to make sure these are set. And the problem is generally Republicans failing to respond or want to appear. We're going to try to see if we can get that to change a little bit, but stay tuned on the website and the calendar there, and we'll have the latest information on that. Next thing is, some of you may have watched the screening we did with Rigged on the 8th of this last week, the voter suppression playbook. Am I breaking up?
No, we hear you.
Good, wonderful. So we put this together. We had about 140 who viewed the film and the panel discussion afterwards. If you want to see this documentary and share it with others, it's on Amazon Prime or on Vimeo. And I put all of this information in the chat. The next thing is, I got a note from Spencer Graves regarding election integrity programs on KKFI. And they had gone through a similar process with Rigged and a panel discussion. Excerpts from those interviews are part of a 30-minute show that's airing nationwide October 1st on Sprouts Radio from the Grassroots. And that will be aired at noon on KKFI here in Kansas City, and perhaps at other times on October 1st. You can go to kkfi.org and click on listen. And there's also more information on a link that Cheryl will put in the e-voter. All of this will appear in the e-voters. So with that, keep your eyes peeled and tune in. Ann, are you here today? In Calvert?
Yes.
Okay, Ann would tell us a little bit about a program that's airing tomorrow.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
This is the untold story of women of color.
I did not send that information around. I'm sorry, I don't know very much about that program.
I'll read it then. This is a program being put on by the St. Louis Metro League of Women Voters in the St. Louis Historical Museum tomorrow at 7 p.m. There is a link. I'll put this into the chat. But this is Dr. Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins, and she's the first African-American president of the League of Women Voters of the U.S. and the author of this book called The Untold Story of Women in Color in the League of Women Voters. She's going to discuss how women of color's voices have been marginalized and how acknowledging and celebrating their passion, purpose, and perseverance during the group's centennial will be a positive influence on the future of all organizations dedicating to making democracy work. Donna, you want to talk about the honorees?
Yes, thank you so much. We were pleased to learn from Pauline that the 2020 Heartland Humanitarians of the Year are Brent Schondelmeyer, sorry for that, Schondelmeyer and Lee Williams. They're a couple that have worked across sectors to drive community initiatives and independence, and really across the region for 30 years. They've been members of the League for the last 2 years and have a long background of being a journalist, being a deputy director of the Local Investment Commission, which we all know as LINC. And they've done things for housing, lower income neighborhoods. They've just, you name it, I think they've been involved in it, and we are so glad they chose to be a part of the League.
We'll get that in the next e-voter, and I want to mention I met Brent 2 or 3 years ago, when I did some reading with grade school kids, I kept seeing Link at schools on the east side. And the members that represented Link there were just really terrific representatives and very engaged in the kids and in before and after school programs. So I sought out Link as a potential partner in distributing voter guides. And Brent just grabbed me, took me into a board meeting one day, and I got to do the pitch. And they've been just staunch supporters of us ever since. He invited Pat Goodwin and I to go talk about the voter guides and Vote 411 at a large board meeting. So, you know, we got to see firsthand evidence of their service to the community. And if anybody knows Brent or would send him a message, I think congratulations are well in order for him and his wife. I am out of announcements, and we're certainly out of time. I'm open to.
Can I just throw something in real quick?
You bet.
This is Becky was saying we educate. One thing that I found out that I did not know, and I can't see it anywhere, is that if you do get a ballot, an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot, and you don't use it, you got to take it with you to vote.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to take it with you to spoil it, because otherwise you don't vote or they get you a preliminary voter. So that's information that's not really out there. And I think we need to make people aware that if they do get one, they only get one. And if you get it and you don't use it, you got to take it in with you.
Right.
Yeah. And Mary wanted to say something about phone banking.
Yes. May I do that?
Yes, please, Mary.
Okay. Yes, phone banking has already begun, at least through No on 3, and it's going to be starting also on Jobs with Justice. But I want to say that it is so valuable. You know, with the phone banking on Medicare, on Medicaid expansion, most people already knew about that and, you know, had their opinion, and you could maybe, you know, influence them a tiny bit. But in all of the phone banking I've done on Amendment 3, people have no clue. They haven't heard about it, know nothing. And so it ends up being a very satisfying kind of work, because you know that you are telling people things. And so you get people saying, well, I'm going to vote for it, and so's my wife, or, you know, we really need to figure out everything we can do to fail, I guess I should say, to stop Amendment 3. Also, writing letters to the editor. I think we all should be trying to get that done, whether to just the Kansas City Star or the Pitch, or even more widely in Missouri.
Thank you, Mary.
Sandy, this is
Yes.
Evelyn. I had given you an announcement about October 3rd, but I'll just go ahead and say, please, everybody, save October 3rd for the fall conference. The league always has a fall conference. It'll be virtual. New members or newer members will find it very educational. It'll be all about the elections, learn what the league does to empower voters and defend democracy every general election, and specifically for this one on November 3rd. It'll be a good fall conference, virtual. Save the date.
Thank you.
At what time?
It'll be 1 p.m. and we'll have to send everybody the link.
So this is another e-voter piece of information.
Okay.
Great.
Another thing I just saw there's a Facebook page, League of Women Voters New Media. Someone had mentioned, which I think is a really good thing to mention, you know, people move sometimes and then they're not registered at the place they're living now. Well, one of the challenges with COVID is we've got all these college kids that have gone to college, and some of those colleges may end up shutting down. And if they do, then where is that kid registered to vote?
Mm-hmm.
And anybody, if COVID turns into a problem where they are and they move back in with mom and dad or whatever, are they going to be able to go to the polls? Are they going to need to do an absentee ballot? You know, we need to just really make people think about younger people we want to encourage them to vote. We've got to also encourage them to make sure they're ready and prepared for wherever they're living and where they're registered.
Good point.
We're doing that. We're doing that on the college campus. We had one young lady actually mention that, Mary. She says, what happens if I have to go home?
Awesome.
So we are talking with them, and many of them, I will say, because Becky was there at Rockhurst, most of those freshmen we talked to were already registered. Some were already sending in their absentee ballots.
Right.
To St. Louis.
Awesome. It might be something we want to put on our website and put, remind people, or on social media also. But awesome that we're doing that at registration.
I will say there is a lot of social media messaging that is planned and scheduled, and it's going out on the No on 3. It's going out on mail-in and absentee ballots and the various deadlines and the notary requirements as well. And we can all help with that by sharing, liking, retweeting, whatever it is, whatever you're on. Please help us spread the word that way. The other thing I do want to say is that one thing I got out of a webinar last week was that we all need to contact everybody on our email contact list, everybody in our phones, and say, are you registered to vote? Have you looked at Vote 411? Have you made a plan to vote? This is just one way that we can reach out and help the get out the vote type of activity going. Just as an individual, you can do it. You could prod 50 people. Wouldn't that be great?
I'll mention a couple of other exposure elements we've got. One is Simi is working with Lamar Advertising for a digital billboard on I-70, and we've got state grant money to do that. So we'll have a message that cycles through on a billboard, and we'll get the information out to you on that as well. The last thing is something I've been working on now for what seems like forever, and that is getting posters on buses. I went through a friend of mine who's the chair of the ATA, and the guy that was going to do it never came through. And I got a phone call one day from Robbie Mackinnon, who's the CEO of KCATA, and he said they're all in. It may turn out that they pay for these posters, but he and I are corresponding about making sure we know what the posters are and look like, and that they work both for Kansas and Missouri, since ATA runs across the state line. So hopefully we'll have some information for voters, for riders of transit, that give us this kind of information that Becky and others have been passing out, and also encourage voting. Stay tuned for that. Any more announcements, parting shots, jokes, anything?
Judy Ansell had an announcement in the chat. On October 8th and 23rd, the Heartland Labor Forum on KKFI will be doing candidate interviews and a piece on Dirty Missouri from 6 p.m. Thursday. That's October 8th and 23rd.
Judy, will any of those candidates be some of these Republicans we can't seem to rope into a forum? If they are, send them our way.
Well, actually, I don't know who the candidates are going to be yet, but we plan on inviting all contenders in a race, no matter what their party.
Of course.
Yes.
Well, my last thought is just, I love this new, improved, bigger, more diverse League of Women Voters. I mean, it's just, I'm blown away by all that's going on and the energy and innovation, and wow.
Great.
Well, we had a little over 50 members today join us, so I think that's a pretty good attendance, live or Zoom, either way. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, well.
Thank you so much to Crystal and Mary and everyone else who worked on the technology to make it
Yes.
50 of us could get together today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks
to
to Crystal.
Mary. No,
She's had to learn and deal with this all at once. So we made it
Yay,
really complicated for her.
Hey, Crystal.
That's
Yay.
technology. This is
Got her Zoom merit badge. Thanks very much, everybody.
And we're glad to have all of our first-time attendees.
Absolutely.
Yes. Woohoo!
And
Newbies.
as Dave is reminding us, we the people, voting matters. Becky had her sign up. Dave's got his constitution up.
I love that.
Has everybody has gotten a Vote 411 bumper sticker, right?
Yes, but remember, Sandy, we aren't driving very much, so we're wearing
Yeah.
our heads.
Well,
That's true.
I am, but yeah. Get them out there. Wear them on your forehead. Put them over your mask, whatever.
Wear them for a mask.
There you go. All right.
Well, see you in the book club.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
See you at 12:30 if you're in book club. Go get your lunch.
Snappy.